Three military working dogs stiffened at the exact same moment, their muscles tightening as if a silent alarm had rippled through the air. Travelers strolled past the rest-stop picnic tables with soda cups and bags of chips, but the dogs saw something different, something urgent. They stared toward the far end of the parking lot, ears pricked, bodies locked, and then, just for a second, the crowd parted. A pregnant woman in U.S. Marine fatigues appeared, her step slow, her expression strangely calm, her hand lifted, not waving, not stretching, but folding into a brief, deliberate signal. Most people wouldn't recognize it, but those dogs did. Their training kicked in instantly. They lunged forward, snapping their leashes tight, growling in low, warning tones. Something had gone terribly wrong, and the only creatures who knew it were the three dogs facing the parking lot. Like soldiers who had spotted a battlefield no one else could see. Before we continue, make sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel so you never miss stories like this one again. And tell us in the comments, what country are you watching from? Your comments truly help this channel grow. Sergeant Emily Hart wasn't the type of Marine anyone overlooked easily. She carried herself with the quiet confidence of someone who had survived desert deployments, night operations, and grueling training sessions that pushed even seasoned soldiers to their limits. But today she wasn't wearing combat gear or carrying equipment. Her fatigues were unbuttoned at the top, her pace slower than usual, and her hand rested protectively on the curve of her stomach. 7 months pregnant, and still every bit the Marine she had always been. The rest stop sat between long stretches of pine forest and open highway, the kind of place travelers rushed through without remembering the details. But the military convoy parked near the back was hard to miss. 3 handlers stood nearby, chatting between shifts while their dogs, Max, Ranger, and Shadow, rested in the shade. Everything looked normal. Everything sounded routine. And yet, beneath that peaceful exterior, something sharp and wrong lingered in the air, like a storm waiting for one final gust of wind. Emily had been traveling since dawn, heading back toward her unit after a mandatory prenatal checkup at a base hospital miles away. Her commanding officer insisted she take the trip alone. It was supposed to be quick, simple, controlled. But Emily's instincts had been itching since she left the clinic. She didn't like unfamiliar routes. She didn't like stopping at isolated rest locations, and she didn't like the way 2 men near the vending machines had glanced at her as she pulled into the lot. She dismissed it at first. People stared at Marines all the time, and plenty of people stared at pregnant women too. But the longer she stayed at the rest stop, the more her senses sharpened. Something hovered at the edge of her awareness, something she couldn't name yet. She reminded herself she was trained, capable, and ready for anything. Even like this, unarmed, alone, and expecting a child, she knew how to read danger. She never saw the van until it rolled up behind her. She had just purchased a bottle of water and stepped into the shade of a tree when the 2 men she'd noticed earlier approached with the kind of friendliness that felt hollow from the first word. One asked if she needed help carrying something. The other complimented her uniform and asked unexpected questions about her rank. Emily positioned her body defensively, 1 foot angled away, one hand subtly drifting toward the small of her back where her concealed pistol normally sat, but today she wasn't carrying it. Today she'd followed regulations, and the men knew it. Before she could react, they grabbed her, one restraining her arms, the other covering her mouth. She kicked, twisted, tried to shout. They forced her into the van with practiced speed. She managed to open one hand near the window as the door slammed. One signal, one desperate hope that someone, anyone, might see her. Someone did, but it wasn't a person. Max felt the shift first. His ears rose, tail stiffening as if he'd heard a command whispered through the breeze. Ranger followed next, his gaze snapping toward the far lot. Shadow, the youngest, growled low enough that only his handler heard it. The men shrugged it off at first. Maybe the dogs smelled a coyote or sensed another animal nearby. But then all 3 pulled in unison, dragging their handlers several steps toward the road as if their lives depended on it. Military working dogs didn't behave this way unless something was terribly wrong. Their training made them disciplined to a fault. Their instincts, though, those were perfect. And right now, those instincts were screaming. The handlers exchanged confused glances. This wasn't normal. Max whined and sniffed the ground obsessively, following the faintest trace of adrenaline and fear lingering in the air. Ranger paced back and forth, circling the same patch of gravel. Shadow tugged toward the highway, barking sharply. One handler noticed a water bottle rolling near the curb, unopened, identical to the one Emily carried when she walked past earlier. He radioed it in, just to be safe. But local authorities had no reports of trouble. No missing persons. No suspicious vehicles. Everything appeared fine, except the dogs, miles away inside a wooden structure deep in the forest. Emily Hart struggled against rope that cut into her wrists. The hideout was the same remote cabin. Countless travelers had unknowingly passed during daylight drives. The air smelled like dust, gasoline, and old lumber. Her captors had thrown a dirty blanket onto the floor and forced her to sit. Her heart raced, not just for herself, but for the child she carried. She slowed her breathing the way she'd been trained, assessing everything around her. 2 men, one with a limp and the other with a scar across his jaw. A window with a cracked frame. A rusted tool bench near the door. Footsteps outside. She memorized every detail. She didn't ask why they took her. She already knew. They wanted leverage. A pregnant Marine was valuable, vulnerable. But they underestimated one thing. She was far more dangerous than she looked. Back at the rest stop, Max suddenly jerked free, snapping his leash with a force that startled everyone within earshot. Ranger followed, muscles rippling as he broke his handler's grip and sprinted toward the tree line. Shadow bounded after them, barking in rapid bursts. The handlers hesitated only a second before running after them, calling backup over the radio. The dogs raced across the highway, through a ditch, and up a dirt path leading into the dense forest. They didn't hesitate. They didn't question. They followed the faint scent of fear and Marine-issued detergent and something that smelled like stress and heartbeats. Emily's heartbeats. Emily's heartbeat. Inside the hideout, Emily waited for the right moment. When one captor stepped too close, she twisted sharply, driving her knee into his thigh. He stumbled. She rose, using her shoulder to slam him into the wall. But the second kidnapper reacted faster. He grabbed her arm, twisted it behind her, and forced her back down. Emily winced. Pain shot up her spine, but she didn't stop fighting. She couldn't. The child inside her kicked, reacting to her tension, and she whispered a quick, steadying breath. She needed to buy time. She needed someone to find her. She prayed that her signal had reached the right eyes. It had. Max burst through the woods first, muzzle lifted, body trembling with determination. Ranger and Shadow flanked him, moving with predatory focus. The handlers pushed through brush and branches, following the barking that echoed through the trees. When the dogs stopped suddenly, claws digging into the earth, tails stiff, heads pointed toward a sagging wooden structure, the handlers froze. That was no animal den, that was a hideout. And someone inside needed them more than ever. The kidnappers heard the barking before the handlers even reached the clearing. They panicked, scrambling to gather their things. Emily saw her chance. As one captor approached with a piece of rope, she lunged, slamming her shoulder into his chest with all the force she could manage. He crashed backward into a table. The second captor cursed, reaching for his weapon. But the dogs were already at the door, barking, scratching, warning. The handlers burst inside as Max leaped at the armed kidnapper, knocking him off balance. Ranger lunged toward the second man, pinning him down, while Shadow positioned himself protectively in front of Emily, blocking her from harm. The room exploded with noise, shouts, barking, splintering wood, but it ended quickly. Within seconds, both kidnappers were restrained, disarmed, and dragged outside. Emily collapsed onto a nearby crate, her breath shaking, her hand instinctively covering her stomach. One handler immediately knelt beside her, assessing her for injuries as backup arrived. She whispered that she was fine, that the baby was fine, but tears formed in her eyes anyway, not from fear, from relief. As medics escorted her from the hideout, Emily glanced at the three dogs who had refused to ignore a signal no human had seen. Max nudged her leg gently. Ranger sniffed her hand. Shadow sat at her feet like a guardian who had never left his post. She smiled weakly and whispered, "I knew someone who understood would notice." But deep down, she hadn't imagined it would be them. Three silent heroes trained not just to obey commands, but to listen to instincts stronger than anything humans could teach. Later, as she was driven back to the base, Emily thought about how close she had come to disappearing without a trace. If those dogs hadn't reacted, if their handlers hadn't trusted them, the outcome could have been unthinkable. But instinct had spoken louder than logic. Training had turned into action. And three dogs had answered a call no one else even heard. Sometimes heroes wear uniforms. Sometimes they carry badges. And sometimes they walk on four legs, waiting quietly for the moment when the world needs them most. And when that moment came, they answered.